By the late 80s, we had a phenomenal success on our hands. In some ways, it was bigger than we'd even planned, which is just incredible for a product that, opened a market which was essentially cynical about buying bottled water in the first place. It was fantastic.
At the height of the 1980s, Perrier had become the aspirational drink for the new yuppie generation. A group that had moved from beer to wine, and from wine, increasingly, to water. The liquid lunch was a thing of the past, and drink driving was unthinkable.
Perrier became a badge. When you held a Perrier bottle up, it said something about yourself, said you were sophisticated, you understood what was happening in the world. It was a perfect beverage for the young, up-and-coming business executives, the trendsetters.
Perrier's business strategy in the UK mirrored that in the US. Its American MD, Bruce Nevins, sold Perrier on a ticket of exclusivity, Frenchness, and style.
Well, we first started placing the product in certain restaurants, bars, and discos in the key markets, which were basically New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco. People were making a statement in terms of, I'm drinking Perrier, a French product. It was something of an association in terms of their lifestyle. It was a reflection of their taste and those kinds of things.
Bruce Nevins is the godfather of the bottled water industry in the U.S. And Bruce Nevins had what turns out to be one of those remarkable insights that seems kind of prosaic in retrospect. He realized that Perrier was a beverage, that you could position it exactly the way you positioned a martini or a bottle of Coke or a mixed drink. It wasn't just water, it was something to order in a restaurant and have with your meal.
Bruce's strategy paid off. Between 1980 and 1989, Perrier US went from 25,000 cases to 10 million. The story was the same in the UK. Perrier had turned water, a basic commodity, into a market.
It's hard to imagine how we've come to the point where water has become not a public good, but a thing to be commodified and put in bottles and sold. I think that's, frankly, a testament to the incredible ability of the commercial industry to sell us anything. To sell us something as fundamental as water requires pretty special skills.
Where Perrier had made the buying of bottled water acceptable to a largely metropolitan elite, Mrs. Thatcher made the buying of tap water a necessity for the rest of us. In 1989, the Conservative government sold Britain's public water supply to private utility companies. All households in England and Wales now had to pay a separate bill to have a shower, fill a kettle, or drink a glass of water. Tap water also now had a price in the market.
For most of our history, British people have just expected water to be something that's free. When Margaret Thatcher came along, in England at least, with water privatisation, people began to see a separate bill. And I think that once you start paying for domestic tap water, then you think, well, it's not such a leap then to think, well, I might as well buy bottled water. Why not pay for that? It's not so different.
With the privatisation of water, the perception of all water had changed. And at the heart of this change was Perrier, the perfect symbol of Thatcher's Britain. The brand seemed unstoppable, but on the 10th of February 1990, news came through that there was a little problem.
The first thing I knew about the Perrier crisis was on a Saturday morning when I got the call from the States saying, Wenche, there's nothing to worry about. They found some benzene, but it was only in one state, and it would be containable, so not to worry, Wenche.
But Perrier's problem was not containable. Benzene is carcinogenic and within 24 hours of its discovery, Perrier and the US decided to recall the product. The UK was forced to follow suit.
The French company Perrier is withdrawing all bottles of its mineral water from sale throughout the world. It follows the discovery of traces of the chemical benzene.
Tests show benzene levels at or above World Health Organization guidelines.
The benzene crisis was a complete bolt out of the blue. One of the things it demonstrates is that any product, any service is never immune from a real crisis. And who would ever thought a pure bottled water would suddenly be faced with potential contamination?
The problem with Perrier was less about the trace levels of benzene that were in the product, more about the fact that it shouldn't be there in the first place. You know, we sold Perrier on the basis of its purity and quality, and you live by the sword, you die by the sword, and that's what happened to us.
The Perrier recall was one of the biggest in the history of the food and beverage industry. Within 48 hours, 70% of all sparkling mineral water disappeared.
I think that I cannot describe how personally I felt about it. It sounded a bit crazy, it was like a baby had been torn away from me. That's how I felt. We had worked so hard and we built it so successfully.
Following the recall, Perrier was off the shelves for 8 long weeks. Time enough for its competitors to circle like sharks.
When Perrier had their recall, Highland Spring absolutely exploited that to the full. It gave us an absolute straight entry into delivery into the market where their product was being taken away. So we had a fabulous opportunity right there and then.
But Highland Spring had another advantage over their foreign rival. Highland Spring was a local British brand, serving a local British market, with both still and fizzy water.
In 1979, when the Highland Spring Company was launched, the market was predominantly led by the French brands, for instance Perrier and Evian. But as soon as Highland Spring was launched, we got quite a significant market share. We picked up almost 20% market share in our first year. So there was definitely a desire from the British public for a British brand.
The consumer desire to buy locally sourced produce was promoted by the then Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher with the slogan, "Buy British."
And it just would help if people, in their buying, would buy British as much as they can.
By tapping into the consumer desire to buy homegrown produce, Highland Spring had a ready market. But in order for the brand to develop further, they needed a leader with a vision. Enter, stage left, Joe Beeston.
When Joe Beeston joined the business, he came from an environment of brands. So he was a marketeer, and what he brought to the business was the opportunity to develop marketing strategy for the first time. It became clear that we had a set of crown jewels sitting in the warehouse that just needed a little bit of attention to enable them to be unlocked.
To unlock the Highland Spring jewels, Joe Beeston embarked on a strategy of product placement. Highland Spring's crowning glory was provided by one of Joe's friends, the former Formula One racing driver, Sir Jackie Stewart. Jackie was travelling on Britain's flagship airline, BA, when he was offered Evian mineral water.
I was travelling in a BA plane and I got a foreign mineral water. I thought that it should have been a British mineral water. I got off the plane and I phoned Lord King, who was at that time chairman and CEO. And I said, why are we drinking foreign water? You should have a British one. And he said, let me talk to somebody about it and I'll call you back.
I don't think it took him too long to convince British Airways that it would be much more fitting for a quintessentially British brand to have a quintessentially British brand of bottled water alongside.
In the slipstream of the world's favourite airline, Highland Spring had become a major player in the rapidly growing bottled water industry. It now sat proudly next to the industry leaders Evian, Volvic and Vittel. But as this market expanded, it also evolved. And where carbonated water had dominated, still water was now becoming the everyday drink of choice. In an age of instant gratification, still bottled water provided what people needed, exactly when they needed it.
People in general are more and more time-pressed. We don't cook our own meals anymore. We eat prepared foods of all kinds. And there's nothing more appealing than a bottle of cold water at a moment when you're really thirsty. Cold water is, in fact, deeply satisfying when you're thirsty. But I think bottled water is one of those products that on many occasions when people buy it, what they're buying isn't the water so much as the bottle. That is, the package and the convenience at that moment.
And when we bought this convenience, what we were really buying was PET, or polyethylene terephthalate, the single motivation in the industry's history. Strong, shatterproof, and a highly valued form of polyester, PET is a byproduct of the oil industry. It is now utilized in the packaging of everything from pharmaceuticals and soap to ready meals. In years to come, the environmental impact of PET would haunt the industry and raise questions about its very survival. But in the 1990s, this was a revolution.
Starting with the introduction of the PET waters, the category started to explode. Before PET was essentially on the list of all beverage categories was number 7. With the advent of PET, bottled water jumped from the number 7 to the number 2 spot behind carbonated soft drinks. It started to grow in the 2 billion, 3 billion range every year, phenomenally high growth rates.
And these growth rates were yet further enhanced by the industry's persuasive arguments that they, unlike tap water, were selling us the taste of natural purity. In an ever more affluent society, the taste and origin of our food and water became even more important. This was the age of the foodie.
We know that British tap water is very heavily treated. There's a lot of chlorine in tap water, particularly in some areas. It doesn't taste as delicious as, beautiful, clean, crisp, fresh water from a mountain stream. And particularly, I think, in metropolitan areas, there was this feeling that the tap water wasn't that great. You heard this thing about it being through other people's kidneys X number of times. There was this question of taste. And I think that's then when the bottled waters were very successful in promoting themselves as purer, cleaner, tasting better.